Hello, everyone. My name is Rudy Sanchez, and I'm a financial aid specialist with the Mount SAC Financial Aid Office. Today, we are going to work on completing the 2021-2022 FAFSA application. FAFSA, of course, stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Financial aid offices at each school will use results from the FAFSA to determine what types of financial aid a student is eligible to receive. By participating in this presentation, our goal is that you will have a better understanding of the online FAFSA application process. Here is an overview of today's agenda. We will first review information about the Federal Student Aid ID, or FSA ID. All students who will complete the online FAFSA application must sign up for a FSA ID. Afterwards, we will cover some information about FAFSA preparation, what documents and information you will need to have available in order to complete the FAFSA application. Next, we will work through a FAFSA application simulation. This simulation will allow us to fill out a demo FAFSA application, which will help us better understand the online FAFSA user experience. Finally, we will conclude our time together with an overview of what to expect after FAFSA. Let's begin with an overview of the Federal Student Aid ID, or FSA ID. All students who seek to complete the online FAFSA application should first create their FSA ID. The FSA ID is essentially a unique username and password which an individual person will create and use in order to fill out and sign the online FAFSA application. By creating an FSA ID, you will be authenticating your identity by inputting your personal information like name, date of birth, and social security number. The FSA ID will also serve as your electronic signature to the online FAFSA application. The FSA ID is created online through the following Federal Student Aid webpage, fsaid.ed.gov. Please note you will need a Social Security number, or SSN, in order to create the FSA ID. All students completing the online FAFSA application will need to create an FSA ID. Additionally, at least one parent of a dependent student will need to create an FSA ID if the parent wishes to sign the application electronically. We will discuss alternative parent signature options during the FAFSA simulation. Great. Once you have created your FSA ID, you are now ready to begin the FAFSA application. However, before we get started, it's important to gather all required documents, as we may need to reference different types of documents in order to answer each FAFSA question. Here is an overview of some of the required documents you should have readily available in order to complete the 2021-2022 online FAFSA application. Social Security card, permanent resident card, driver's license, 2019 income tax returns, 2019 W-2 and other records of income earned from work, bank statements and records of investments, and records of 2019 untaxed income, for example, child support received, untaxed IRA distributions, and pension or annuity payments. If some of the documents covered don't apply to you, that's okay. Gather what is applicable to your situation. Okay, we're now ready to begin the FAFSA simulation section of our presentation. Before we look at the online FAFSA demo application, we would like to review a few disclaimers. Here are some things to consider. The student and parent data we will be using during the online FAFSA demo is completely fictitious. We will not be using anybody's actual personal information. Also, every applicant's family and financial situation is different. This means that some of the questions and responses reviewed during the FAFSA simulation may look different than your experience. We will try to offer general guidance throughout the FAFSA simulation regarding different scenarios, but please keep in mind that we might not cover a scenario that is applicable to your situation. Something else to consider is that we will be reviewing the online FAFSA application, or FAFSA on the web application. There are, however, other alternative FAFSA formats, such as a mobile FAFSA app called the My Student Aid app, and the paper FAFSA application, which is available as a PDF file. Please choose the format that will best suit your needs. Finally, help is available. If you have any questions or concerns with the FAFSA application, you can contact the Federal Student Aid Information Center, which is a federal contact center dedicated to helping students and families complete the FAFSA application. You can also contact the Mount SAC Financial Aid Office for assistance, and we'd be happy to help you. Okay, now that we have covered some of those disclaimers, let's get started with the FAFSA simulation. In order to access the FAFSA application, you will want to go to the FAFSA webpage. Go to your browser and input fafsa.ed.gov and press enter. You are now on the FAFSA webpage. You will notice that there are two entry points, one for new users and one for returning users, those who have already started or completed the FAFSA application. For our purposes, we will select Start Here, since we are new to the FAFSA process. We are now at the login page, and we will have the option to identify ourselves as the student or as the parent, a preparer, or a student from a freely associated state. We will select I am the student. At this point, you will need to enter your FSA ID information. If you have never created a FSA ID, that's okay. Notice that there is a link to create one, and that will take you to a separate page so that you can create that FSA ID. If you forget your username or your password, you do have the option to go through the forgot username or the forgot password steps in order to retrieve that information. In our example, the student's FSA ID username is renewal66, and their password is going to be renewapp66. Select Next once you enter your information. The next page you see is a disclaimer. Please read the disclaimer. If you accept the disclaimer, then you can move forward with the online FAFSA application. You are now on a My FAFSA webpage, which shows you your FAFSA status for any active financial aid years. Notice that there are currently 2 application years which we can toggle between, 2020, 2021, and 2021, 2022. Please note you should complete the 2020-2021 application year if you intend to apply for financial aid funding at Mount SAC for the fall 2020, spring 2021, or summer 2021 terms. You will want to complete the newer 2021-2022 FAFSA application if you intend to apply for financial aid for the fall 2021, spring 2022, and summer 2022 terms. For our example, the student will be completing the 2021-2022 application, and for our purposes, they will select Start Over. Now, before starting the FAFSA application, you will have to create a save key. The save key serves as a temporary password and allows you to return later from the point you left off if you need to stop and save your work. It also allows you to share access if your parents need to add their information. For our purposes, the save key will be 12345. Select Next to continue. Now, the next section of the FAFSA that we will see is a listing of frequently asked questions, or FAQs. Feel free to read through them as needed. Once you're ready to move forward, you can select Next. The first section of the FAFSA will cover student information. You will notice that the field for the Social Security number is grayed out and it is not editable. This is due to the demo student in our example having already logged in with their FSA ID. Remember, the FSA ID authenticates your identity. In this student's case, their Social Security number exists and matched up with their information. In this section of the application, you will want to report your first name, middle initial, last name, and date of birth. Please make sure to report your name information exactly as it appears on your Social Security card. This will help prevent possible processing delays or requirements for you to submit additional paperwork. Once you have entered your information, you can select Next. You will now enter your email address and telephone and select Next. The next section will ask you for a mailing address. Some students will receive FAFSA communications and updates through the mail, so it is important to include an address that is accessible to you. For this student, address information pre-populated due to the FSA ID. However, we will go ahead and change the state to California just for our purposes. Once you enter your address information, you can select Next to continue. We will now have to answer questions about residency and citizenship. The first question asks whether you have lived in a particular state for at least 5 years. In this example, the student's mailing address was California, so they see a question asking whether the student has lived in California for at least 5 years. If you select no, there are some additional questions to confirm your residency. For our purposes, we will select yes to this question. You will then have to answer the question about whether you are a US citizen. The possible answers are yes, I am a US citizen or US national, no, but I am an eligible non-citizen, or no, I am not a citizen or eligible non-citizen. If you need assistance with this question, you can select the blue question mark icon, which will take you to a separate tab. Notice that there are instructions about who is considered a US citizen, and additionally, you can get further clarification about who is considered an eligible non-citizen, and who is considered neither a citizen nor eligible non-citizen. Once you're done, you can close out of the tab. For our example, the student is an eligible non-citizen because they are a permanent resident. Those who select eligible non-citizenship will have to report their alien registration number, which for our student is found on their permanent resident card. They will enter their information and select next to continue. The next section will ask the student to report various educational statuses as of the 2021-2022 school year. For our purposes, the student will have their high school diploma once they begin the 2021-2022 school year, and they will be working toward an associate degree when they begin the 2021-2022 school year. And since they are just beginning their college journey, they will select no to the question of whether they will have their first bachelor's degree before beginning the 2021-2022 school year. The next question asks about what the student's college grade level will be once they begin the 2021-2022 school year. For our student, they will be taking a few Mount SAC college courses through one of Mount SAC's summer programs. Because they will have earned some college credits during the summer prior to the start of the 2021-2022 school year, the student will select attended college before first year. The final question will ask if the student is interested in work study. Work study is a type of financial aid program where students earn financial aid in the form of a paycheck through student employment. If you think this might be a good option for you, you can select yes. Don't worry, by selecting yes, you're not committing to working. Your response will just let the financial aid office know that you are interested. Otherwise, you can just select no or don't know. The student in our example will select yes. Once you have finished answering each question, you will select next. You are now presented with a question of whether you are male or female. This question is used to determine whether you are required to have registered for Selective Service. Selective Service is a system used by the United States to draft individuals into the armed forces in the event of a national emergency. Current federal law requires all persons who were assigned the sex of male at birth to register for Selective Service if they are between the age of 18 through 25. If you were assigned the sex of male at birth and are between the age of 18 through 25 and have not yet registered, you may register through the FAFSA application. Please keep in mind that registering for Selective Service is not the same as joining the military. Additionally, persons who are required to have registered for Selective Service and who choose not to register will not be eligible for federal financial aid and some types of state financial aid programs. For our purposes, the student is going to respond that they are male, and the student will respond that they have not registered with the Selective Service, and they are choosing to register for Selective Service through the online FAFSA application. You can then select next once you're ready to move forward. Students with a driver's license may now enter their driver's license number and state. In our example, the student does not have a driver's license, so they will simply skip these questions and select next. The student will then have to report whether they are a foster youth or were at any time in the foster care system. In our example, the student will answer no to this question. The student will then need to provide education completion level for each parent, parent 1 and parent 2. For our purposes, the student will report that parent 1 has an education completion level of middle school, junior high, and that parent too has an education completion level of college or beyond. If you happen to not know the education completion level of your parent or parents, you may select Other Unknown. Once you answer each question, you can select Next. The next question will ask whether you have ever received federal student aid. For our purposes, the student will answer no and select Next to continue. Great, we're now in the school selection section of the online FAFSA. You will need to report the name of your high school if you have previously reported that you earned a high school diploma. Otherwise, you will not see this question. You can use the search feature in order to find your specific high school. For our purposes, the student went to ABC Sample High School in the city of Walnut, in the state of California. Once you enter your information, you will select Next to continue. Now at this point of the FAFSA, you will have to include college or colleges onto your online FAFSA application. You may include up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. You have the option of entering the federal school code for each school if you happen to not know the code. If you do know the code, you can select Yes and enter the school code. For our example, the student does not know Mount SAC's school code, so they will have to search for the school. They know that Mount SAC is in California, and they will search by entering the school's name. Once you do that, you enter the state or the city and the school name. You can select Search to find that school. There is one search result, which is Mount San Antonio College. The student will select the box. And remember, you can add more schools. It is possible to include up to 10 schools. Once you have included all of the schools that you wish to add on your application, you can select Next. All students will need to select a housing plan for each school they are including on the FAFSA. Housing plans are either on campus, with parent, or off campus. Choose the housing situation that you think will most likely occur for your situation. For our student, they will be selecting an off-campus housing plan since they plan on renting their own apartment. Select Next once you have made your housing plan selection for each school. Okay, we're now in the dependency status section of the FAFSA. This section will ask very specific questions in order to determine whether a student will need to include parent information on the FAFSA. Students who are required to provide parent information are considered dependent students for financial aid purposes, whereas students who are considered independent students are not required to provide parent information. The first question of this section will ask, what is your marital status as of today, which is the date you're completing the FAFSA application. For our student, they will respond that they are single, and then select Next to continue. The next set of questions will ask whether the student has or will have any children or dependents whom they are financially supporting between specific dates. In our example, the student will respond no to both questions. If prior responses to dependency status questions have been no, you will then see the following checkboxes with various questions. Select any checkbox as it applies to your situation. For our purposes, our demo student will select none of the above. Select Next once you are ready to move forward. The next question will ask if on or after a certain date the student was homeless or was self-supporting and at the risk of being homeless. In our example, the student is going to select no. Notice that this next section of the FAFSA will report that the student is considered a dependent student. Dependent students are required to provide parental information in order to have their financial aid eligibility finalized. At this point, a dependent student can select that they will provide information about their parent or parents, or they can select that they are unable to provide information about their parent or parents due to a special circumstance. Dependent students who cannot provide information about their parent or parents are able to submit their FAFSA application without parent information. However, they will have to work with the financial aid office at their school in order to review their financial aid eligibility and next steps. For our purposes, the student will select, I will provide information about my parent or parents. We are now in a section of the FAFSA where parent information will get reported. The first question will ask, what is the parent's marital status as of today, the date that you are completing the FAFSA application? If you have questions about who is considered a parent on the FAFSA, you can select the blue hyperlinked text, which reads parents. You will be taken to a page which defines who is the FAFSA parent, and there is also an infographic which you can use for additional assistance. For our student, their parents are married, and so they will make that selection. This student will then have to enter the date that their parents were married. Select Next to continue. At this point, the student must now enter information about their first parent. Because the student reported that their parents are married or remarried, they will need to include information for two parents. This first parent will be referred to as parent 1 on the FAFSA, and the second parent that they report information about will be parent 2. Each parent will need to have their social security number, last name, first initial, and date of birth provided. If a parent does not have a social security number, that's okay. You will simply input all zeros for their social security number on the FAFSA. For this student, their first parent does have a social security number, and so the student will input that information. The student will then provide the parent's last name, first initial, date of birth, and their email address. Select Next to continue. And for our student, they will enter their second parent's information. For our purposes, parent 2 for this student does not have a social security number, so they will input all zeros for the social security number. The student will then provide the parent's last name, first initial, and date of birth. And select Next to continue. The next question will ask about your parents' state of legal residence. In this example, the parents have lived in California for at least 5 years, so the student will respond yes, and select Next to continue. The next section of the online FAFSA application will ask about household size. For dependent students, the household size is based upon the parent's household size, whereas the household size for independent students is based strictly on the student and whether they are financially supporting other persons. In our example, the student has 2 parents on the FAFSA, which is why you see the value of 2 grayed out and already provided on the FAFSA. And currently, the household size is 3. To include both parents and to include the student. Keep in mind that you can report other persons in the household as long as they meet the criteria explained on this screen. First of all, you can include other children in the household if they will receive the majority of their financial support from the parents between specific dates, or if those children can answer no to every dependency status question on the FAFSA. And notice you can select the hyperlinked text if you wanted to see those questions. In our example, the student has 2 siblings who receive the majority of their financial support from the parents. After entering those 2 siblings, the total household size is now increased to 5 since the student has included their 2 siblings. Finally, the household size can also include other people if they now live with the student's parents, will receive the majority of their financial support from the parents, and will continue to receive that support between specific dates. For our purposes, the student will include 1 person, a cousin, because they meet the conditions explained on the FAFSA application. The total household size is now 6. You'll then have to report the amount of people that will be enrolled in college between specific dates, or number in college. Please note, you may not include your parents in the number in college. For our purposes, the student and 1 of their siblings will be enrolled in college, so the number in college is equal to 2. Once you have completed this section, you will select Next. We are now in the Parent Financials section of the 2021-2022 FAFSA application. You will need to report your parents, for dependent students, 2019 tax filing status. For our student, the parents have already filed their 2019 taxes, so they will select already completed. Additional questions will populate for individuals who report already completed as the tax filing status. The next question will ask what type of tax return that the parent or parents filed in 2019, and what was the tax filing status that was used. For our purposes, the student's parents filed an IRS 1040 tax return, and they used a filing status of married filing joint. Remember that you have the option to select the blue question mark icons if you need assistance with answering these questions. If you need help finding their tax filing status, you can select that blue question mark icon and you're provided a visual aid to help you locate the information on the 1040 tax form. Okay, based on the information we have provided, the parents have the option to use the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or DRT. The IRS DRT is a tool that transfers tax data information directly onto the FAFSA application. The information is retrieved from the IRS system and imported onto the FAFSA. Feel free to use the DRT, or you can simply select Next if you prefer to report the tax information manually. The next question you are asked is about your parents' adjusted gross income for 2019. Notice that the FAFSA also includes instructions about where to find this information. For this question, the directions instruct you to look on IRS Form 1040, line 8B. For further assistance, including a visual aid, you can select that blue question mark icon, and you will be provided information and the visual aid on where to find the adjusted gross income. Enter the amount reported on 1040 line B, which in our example will be $60,000. And select Next once you're ready to continue. The next questions are intended to determine how much income each of your parents earned from working. If one or neither of your parents earned income from working, you can input 0. Notice that you will need to look at information reported in different areas. For example, IRS Form 1040, line 1, Schedule 1, lines 3 plus 6, and Box 14, Code A of IRS Schedule K1. If your parent does not have information reported through some of these forms, for example, they only have information reported on 1040 line 1, but they don't have a Schedule 1 or Schedule K1, then you will only need to report the information on the 1040 line 1. For our purposes, this is also the case for this student's parents. Parent 1 for this student did not work in 2019, so the student will input 0 for parent 1. And parent 2 only had earnings as reported on line 1 of IRS Form 1040. They didn't use a Schedule 1 or a Schedule K1. The amount reported on IRS Form 1040 line 1 for our student is going to be $40,000. The student will enter that amount for parent 2 and then select Next to continue. The next question asks about the amount of income taxes paid in 2019. The instructions direct you to subtract the amount reported on Schedule 2, line 2 from the amount reported on IRS Form 1040, line 14. If your parents did not file Schedule 2, that's okay. You will then only report any amount on 1040, line 14. You can also use that blue question mark icon if you need additional assistance and a visual for where to look on the 1040 and where to look on the Schedule 2. For our purposes, the student's parents paid $500 in income taxes. Select Next to continue. Great, we'll now need to report other sources of parent income or credits as reported on the IRS 1040 tax return. The question asks, did your parents have any of the following items in 2019? Read through each item carefully and refer to the parents' tax forms and financial documents as needed. If one item or multiple items don't apply, you may leave the amount as 0. Of course, make sure to use the blue question mark icon if you have any questions or need an explanation of what's being asked. For our demo students' parents' information, the parents have $1,500 in education credits as reported on their 1040 tax return. Select Next once you have made all of your responses. Another set of financial items is now presented on the FAFSA. Read through each item and report your parents' information as applicable. Similar to the last screen that we worked on, you may leave responses as 0 if the situation doesn't apply. For our purposes, all of these responses are 0, so the student will select next to move on. The next question will ask for additional financial information related to sources of parent untaxed income. Read through each financial item and report any amounts as applicable. For our purposes, the student's parents did make payments to tax-deferred pension and retirement savings plan. The student would enter the appropriate amount as reported on the parent W-2. And for this student, the amount is $10,000. Select next to continue. The FAFSA application will sometimes take into consideration the value of parent asset information as of the date that the FAFSA is being completed. Whether or not you are presented with parent asset questions will depend on your specific situation and the information you would have reported through the online FAFSA application. For this student, the student is asked whether the total amount of their parents' assets exceeds $5,900. Please note the dollar amount in this question will be different depending on your specific FAFSA information. If you're unsure what is meant by the word assets, you can select the blue hyperlinked text, assets, or select the blue question mark icon. And once again, that will provide you definition and further explanation about what the question is asking. For our demo student, their parents have $10,000 in a checking and savings account, so they will select yes and report that amount on the FAFSA. The student's parents don't have any investments, nor do they own a business or farm, so they will leave the rest of the questions as 0. Select next once you have made your responses. We now enter a section of the FAFSA which will ask about student financial information. The student financial questions are identical to what was asked from the parents. The student is first asked whether they filed taxes in 2019. For our purposes, the student did not and was not required to file taxes in 2019, so they will select not going to file. Once you're ready to move on, select next. For students who state they will not file taxes, the next question will ask whether they earned any income from working. For our student, the student worked in 2019 and earned $2,000. Report the amount as applicable to your situation, even if the amount is 0, and select next to continue once you're ready to move forward. Additional financial questions are then asked. Read through each financial item and report information as needed. For our student, each financial item will be reported as 0. Select next to continue. The student is then asked to report any sources of untaxed income, similar to the parent financial question. For our purposes, none of these untaxed financial items is applicable to the student, so the information will be left as 0. And we will select next to continue. The next set of questions asks about student asset information as of today, which is the date that the student is completing the online FAFSA application. For our student, they have $500 in a checking account and $500 in a savings account as of the date they are completing the FAFSA application. The student will report $1,000 and leave the other amounts as 0 since they don't apply. Select next to continue. Great, we're nearing completion of the online FAFSA. The next question asks whether you are a preparer. A preparer is an individual you're paying to complete the application on your behalf. If you are completing your own FAFSA application, you will select no and then select next. The next screen will provide a summary of your responses on the FAFSA application. Carefully review this screen to ensure that all of the information you reported is accurate. If you happen to see an error, you can correct the information. For example, our student realized that their household size should be 7 instead of 6. They forgot to account for a younger sibling. The student will select the blue hyperlinked household size question, and this will take the student back to the appropriate section on the FAFSA. And so the student will then change the amount to 3 to account for that younger sibling, and the household size is now 7. In order to go back to the FAFSA summary page, you may continue by selecting Next until you reach the summary page, or you can select Sign and Submit on the top of the application. Review the rest of your responses to ensure no other corrections are needed. Once you're ready to move forward, select Next. We are now on the final section of the online FAFSA, the signature section. The FAFSA application is considered incomplete without the signature. All students must sign their FAFSA application, and all dependent students must have a parent signature submitted with their FAFSA. The student completing the online FAFSA application will sign the online application with their FSA ID. The student will select Provide Student Signature, and then read through some of the terms and conditions. If you agree to the terms and conditions, you can proceed with signing the application. The student will now sign the application by selecting Sign this FAFSA. Since our student is a dependent student based on their FAFSA information, they will need to have a parent signature in order to complete the application. Please keep in mind that in order for a parent to electronically sign with a FSA ID, the parent will need a social security number and will need to create a FSA ID. Once the parent creates their FSA ID, the parent can input their FSA ID information in order to electronically sign the online FAFSA application. For parents who do not have a social security number or who do not wish to use a FSA ID, there is an option to print out a signature page. The printed signature page will need to get mailed to the appropriate address as included on the signature page instructions. In order to provide the parent signature, you will need to select Provide Parent Signature. And the parent will also need to agree to the terms and conditions before proceeding. The parent signature screen will allow the parent to enter their FSA ID information, or they can select other options to sign and submit if they won't be using the FSA ID. For our students, parent 1 has a social security number and has chosen to create the FSA ID to electronically sign the application. The parent will therefore enter their FSA ID information and will select Sign once that is entered. For our example, the parent's FSA ID username is hold102, and their password is esign102. Both electronic signatures are now provided on the FAFSA application. You will select Submit My FAFSA Now once all signatures are provided. Okay, congratulations. You will now see a confirmation page which will help confirm that your application was submitted and will also include some information about next steps. Read through this page as needed and then select Exit once you are finished. Okay, let's now briefly cover what you can expect after completing the FAFSA application. The Mount SAC Financial Aid Office will receive your FAFSA application within 5 to 7 business days from the date you submit your FAFSA, as long as Mount SAC's school code 001245 was included on the application. Once your FAFSA is processed through the federal processing system, you will receive an email notifying you that your FAFSA was processed and that your Student Aid Report, or SAR, is now available. We encourage you to view your SAR, as this will report information about your eligibility and will even provide an estimate in terms of your possible federal financial aid eligibility. Once Mount SAC receives your FAFSA, we will communicate financial aid status and eligibility information through your Mount SAC student portal. Make sure to periodically log into your portal and view the information available in the financial aid section of that portal. Through your portal, you can view what financial aid requirements are needed from you, if applicable, and you will also have access to your financial aid offer. Of course, we encourage you to connect with us if you have any questions or concerns about your financial aid status and/or eligibility. Here's an example of how you can use your Mount SAC financial aid offer to develop a financial plan. Once you review your financial aid offer, you can calculate the total amount of financial aid you are receiving compared to the total amount of expenses or costs that you will need to pay. Notice how in this example, the student is receiving about $9,000 of free financial aid money. This amount is much greater than the total costs which the student plans to pay. In this example, the student would receive a refund and can then use those funds to pay toward textbooks, transportation costs like gas, and even living expenses. Well, that concludes our time together during this completing the FAFSA presentation. Please feel free to connect with us if you have any questions or wish for us to clarify anything that was covered or may not have been covered during this presentation. We are here to support your success as a Mount SAC student. You can call us at 909-274-4450, reach us by email at financialaid@mountsac.edu. We also have great information and resources available through our website, mountsac.edu/financial aid, and our Instagram page at mountsac_FA. Thank you, and we wish you ongoing success.